Hi, so today we're going to do a discussion on the history of beauty, and this is going to be separated into three parts. First, I'm going to talk about through the decades how beauty and its ideals have changed in America. Second, I'm going to talk about what women in the past have done to kind of enforce these beauty ideals and what they've done to accomplish and strive to achieve them. And then third, I'm going to talk about how we're kind of moving towards a more body positive sort of lifestyle in America, but not completely and definitely not as much as we should. Alright, so in the 1900s to the 1910s, the ideal woman was a Gibson Girl. So this involves a woman who is slender and tall with wide busts and hips. Corseting and physical activity was used to kind of achieve this really intense hourglass figure. Like, I know later on there's more of like a kind of curvy, but we're talking like complete hourglass. The ideal woman in this time period was Camille Clifford, and so think like a figure eight when you're thinking this body shape. In the 1920s, there was a complete departure from this, so women were expected to look more androgynous with no breasts, and like they wanted short hair, straight figure. It was kind of a reversal of the beauty roles in the past, because the 1910s are really about like being beautiful and very, very feminine, stereotypically. But in the 1920s, we're experiencing blowback from that, so now we're more into the whole looking like a boy thing. In the 1930s and the 1940s, so for some reason, shoulder width was a big deal. They wanted them to like have really wide shoulder width, and then they wanted like muscly contoured bodies rather than the soft bodies that we saw, for instance, in the 1900s and the 1910s. So advertisements talked a lot about how to avoid the too skinny look, which, especially compared to today, is just a big culture shock. In the 1950s, the fuller look came back into style, so think Grace Kelly, Marilyn Monroe. They wanted them to have flawless skin, perfect bodies, everything else. In the 1960s, we swing back again, and now we're thin, almost prepubescent, so think Twiggy. Think like scarily skinny with bones and emaciation. In the 1970s, this thin ideal continued, and eating disorders become more of a prevalent problem in the public eye. So they want hair to be long and makeup to look, you have to wear makeup, but you have to look natural. So that dichotomy is sort of coming into its own, which we see now today. The 1980s is thin but fit. So think the bodysuited leggings-esque with the leg warmers, and you're pumping iron, and you're thin, but you have muscle. You're like toned. So think Olivia Newton-John. 1990s is where it gets real, like really, really skinny. So they actually called it heroin chic, which is completely terrifying. So there was two different kinds of thin you could be in the 90s. It was heroin chic, in which you looked like you were about 5 minutes away from death. And then there was the Baywatch idealized form of the woman figure. So big boobs, very thin. So Kate Moss was one of these options, and then women from Baywatch were another. Now we're in the 2000s and the 2010s, and we're sort of at an impasse. So there's like 70 different ways to be beautiful, but all of them involve not looking like yourself. The eating disorder epidemic is growing more than ever, and people are expected to be thin. The thigh gap or the paper challenge I kind of show how the woman's body is expected to meet unrealistic standards. A major aspect of beauty and how women are expected to meet unrealistic standards is called disciplinary beauty practices. So the definition of this is disciplinary body practices are defined as taken for granted routinized behaviors such as shaving legs, applying makeup, curling, straightening, or coloring hair, and they are disciplinary because they involve social control in the sense that we spend time, money, and effort and imbue meaning in these practices that regulate our lives. So, women and men both experience this kind of problem, but with women, economically, it takes a much larger toll than it does on men. So, for instance, men normally are like like you're lifting weights and stuff and you have hair gel. But with women, there's a wide variety of physical procedures which you can go under the knife for. You have collagen injections, liposuctions, tummy tucks, breast reductions. There's just a whole litany of ways to fix your body that are inevitably damaging to you in the long run as an individual. And this is not just a modern problem. During the 19th century, white privileged women were encouraged to have this really thin, fragile appearance, and they wore bone-crushing corsets that these corsets bound you in so tightly that you couldn't breathe. And there was a whole epidemic of women swooning, which is where that kind of stereotype comes from, because no air was able to come in. There was actually a kind of chair designed for the women of this age, the Victorian swooning chair, which is appalling. To wrap it up, we are definitely, I think, moving towards a better way of dealing with beauty. There is a big emphasis on the body positivity movement. There's a lot of, on social media, there are lots of people who are doing their best to make sure that everyone knows that they're beautiful. But some would argue that in arguing that everyone's beautiful, you're still putting a sort of idolized point of view on beauty in which if you're not beautiful, you're not worth anything. So I would like to close this by saying women go through a lot to change their bodies to fit what they're supposed to look like. And I know this is not going to be an overnight solution, but over time, we need to start moving towards the idea that we are not our bodies or our faces or our hair, but we are our thoughts and our feelings and our opinions and our passions. And the idea that there was a swooning chair for women because they were damaging their bodies in order to be so fragile that the man of the time could look upon them with affection is appalling. And we need to think more outside the box from our traditional realm of beauty. Thank you so much.